This lesson is going to examine equivalent fractions. So I've just drawn a representation of the fraction 1/2 here using a rectangle. I divided into two equal parts, and as you can see I've shaded one of the parts in red. Okay? So right now I have a visual representation of 1/2. Well, what happens if I take this same rectangle and carve it into 4 equal parts? In other words, double the 2 here and make it 4 equal parts. Well, how many parts would I then have to shade to make it equivalent to the 1/2? In other words, to make sure it occupies the same amount of space as the red up here. Well, I'd have to color in 2. So as you can see, 1/2 is equivalent to 2/4. Let me do this again. What happens if I take this half right here and multiply it by 4? In other words, instead of 2 equal parts, what if I have 8 equal parts? How many parts would I have to shade? Well, I have 8 equal parts now, and I want to make sure I shade the same amount of space as the previous 2 fractions. So I shade one box, another, that's still not enough, a 3rd box, and finally a 4th box. So, what you can see now is 1/2, 2/4, and 4/8 are all equivalent because they take up the same amount of space. So let's look how we can adjust fractions to make them equivalent, in case we might need to do that a little later down the line, without having to draw all the diagrams. Well, notice when I started with 1/2, if I took the 2 parts and made them 4, in other words, if I multiplied by 2 on the bottom, how many did I have to then shade to make it equivalent? I had to shade 2 times as many, from 1 to 2. So I have to, if I multiply the bottom by 2, I have to multiply the top by 2 as well to keep it equivalent. Let's look at what I did with the bottom one now. So I started with 2 up here, and then I made it into 8 equal parts. So I took the 2 and multiplied it by 4 to create 8. So, and then how many parts did I have to shade? Well, I went from 1 here to 4 here, so I had to shade 4 times as many to keep it equivalent. So this is a visual representation why when you multiply the bottom by a certain number, you have to multiply the top by that, the numerator, by that same number to keep it equivalent. And as of course we can see, 1/2 is equivalent to 4/8 based on the amount of shading taking place. Okay? So in the future, if you ever need to convert to equivalent fractions, all you need to do, depending on what you're looking for, is multiply the top by a certain number and multiply the bottom by that same number. So just to give one more example, if I take the fraction, let's say 3/7, well, if I multiply the bottom by 3 as long as I multiply the top by 3, I'm going to create an equivalent fraction. So 9/21 is equivalent to 3/7. So this concludes this video on equivalent fractions.